What's up, guys? How's it going? Let me know that you can hear me okay. Just kind of getting rolling here. We're just a teensy tiny bit late, still getting set up. Hopefully the sound is okay. Let me know. Just gonna wait for my assistant to help me real quick while we're kind of getting a little bit moved around here. How are you guys doing today? You almost ready over there? Okay. Alright, well, I'm waiting for my assistant. If you guys saw me post about this drawing, okay, sounds good, awesome. You guys saw me post this drawing a couple of days ago, or if you saw it on my Instagram stories or otherwise, knew that I was going to be doing a full demo today, or as much as humanly possible today, of this particular Ferrari 275 GTB. Hello, great, glad to hear that the audio is working. From the streaming software that I use, it's really hard to tell, I'll be honest.
Do you have the other thing going too?
What's that?
The recording thing you were telling me about?
I didn't have a chance to set it up, so
okay.
We're just gonna have to go. Hello from the UK, hello from Southern California. Alright, I don't want to waste too much time. I've got my lovely assistant here who can help me field questions. You guys feel free to ask any questions you want related to this, anything at all, anything. Totally up for anything. Got to keep the conversation going in the video. Meanwhile, I'm going to jump into this. If there's no questions in between stuff, I'll explain a little bit of what I'm doing. Meanwhile, let's just jump right into it. So here's the sketch that I initially shared. What I was working on just before the footage was the new version of this that I was going to render. So underneath this guy is the actual sketch. Now, obviously, this is a lot lighter, and it's bluer. A lot of times when I do sketches like this, they're really more for social media. They're so extra line weights, extra bold, extra impact, because when you're just showing the lines as a sketch, you need to sell this as a little bit better as a bit more impactful. But as far as a rendering goes, you don't necessarily need all these outlines, especially not in black. When you have these really heavy outlines and you render something, sometimes it can look a little bit cartoony because you have these beautiful line weights, and I think this is fantastic. As a sketch, this holds up really good, but if I'm going to render something, I don't want every single line. I want to render some of the details. I don't necessarily want to draw every single detail in. So you can see that I don't have the spokes drawn in, I don't have some of the outline stuff drawn in, because it's not important. That stuff will become part of the process as we go. So,
we had a question already.
Go for it, shoot, and I'll keep jamming through this.
Alan Collymore says, how long have you been drawing? Formally trained or self-taught?
I have been drawing since I was very young, probably 5 or 6. I started doing a lot more drawing when I was in kindergarten and first grade. And it's almost always been cars, interestingly enough. I have no formal training. And by that I mean I didn't go to college, I didn't go to a design school, I did none of those things. Actually, most of my career was from being in body shops, learning to prep cars and paint cars, and then later I was a full-time painter of actual cars, and later my wife and I had a shop where we worked on just Ferraris. So if I'm formally trained in anything, it's painting and prepping cars, not actually drawing. But it's something I always did as a hobby and something I've always enjoyed. Eventually I just switched gears and decided it's what I wanted to do full time. So that's what I did. And I do want to show you guys some of the changes I made in this drawing, because you can tell from the initial drawing, which was cool and very energetic, I made a lot of changes. A good example is this bump in the fender right here. This is a little bit more 250 GTO. The bump is really aggressive. And on a 275, I've actually got some great Ferrari books here, the bump is not as aggressive. So in lieu of trying to tighten up some of the details on the final outline, brought the bump down a little bit, made the car a little bit thicker. Like here it had a bit more ride height because the car was a little bit skinny. In reality, the car is actually taller and thicker, and the roof actually has a bit more of a chopped look to it. It actually looks like a chopped car. So I wanted to make sure that in my final sketch, even if it's not perfect, I at least took those things into account. If you just ignore the details, then you're ignoring details. So don't want to do that. And then of course I rechanged the shape of the grill a little bit to be a little bit more reflective of that particular angle. Moved a couple of pieces of parts around. You know, the vents here are much bigger and closer to the fender well. I skinnied them up so that they fit inside this here. When you're looking at reference photos, you're basically looking at distance between objects or where they relate to one another. So in my initial sketch, I just kind of hammered things out and put things in place. And that's okay. I never assume that my initial sketch is going to be exactly what I'm going to render. Sometimes yes, not often. So, but if I have an opportunity to have a second stage like this, then I want to make sure that I'm taking some of those adjustments into account. Otherwise, I'm just kind of being ignorant of details. And I'll point more of that stuff out as I go. I would just love to jump right into this. So I'm going to clear some stuff off my desk. Bear with me. Please, any questions you guys have, ask away.
Max says hi from Chile.
Hello there.
Alan Collymore said, nice, thanks. Maybe there's still time for a 70-something. So he's probably 70-something years old.
No. Oh, yeah. It is never too late. I didn't get serious about drawing and doing artwork full-time. I think I was 26, 25, somewhere there. I know, that might seem...
26.
Yeah, that might seem like, oh, yeah, you were still young. At that point, I'd already worked full-time in body shops for 8 years. I started young. But it wouldn't matter. If I was serious about drawing today, I would still do the same exact thing. Your age is really just a number when it comes to stuff like that. So what I'm doing over here is I've always got a scrap piece of paper where I'm going to test out all the materials that I'm going to use to make sure that the markers I have are in good shape. And I have an idea for how I want to do this paint scheme and kill the purist a little bit. So when I was looking at some reference stuff earlier, I thought it would be really cool to two-tone this instead of just doing a straight red or a straight yellow or straight green. Initially, I was actually going to do it green, but I thought I'll land somewhere in the middle. But in any case, I always keep a scrap piece of paper here so that I can test all my materials on the exact piece on the exact type of paper that I'm going to use. And yeah, I've clearly only tested one marker. So I do have a bit to go as far as that goes, but I want to keep things moving for the moment. So I'm actually just going to jump right in. So as you can see from the note, Scarlet, it's a Scarlet Chart Pack marker. Something like this I'm going to try to get through as quickly as possible. So bear with me if I just kind of scribble really, really fast. And although, and I treat these the YouTube and the Facebook streams a little bit differently than the Instagram streams. The Instagram streams, because the orientation of the camera is the opposite, it's not conducive to rotate the page, but I absolutely will on this, because sometimes when I draw I need to move the page around in order to get my hands into a spot where they want to be a little bit better. And yeah, I won't hold back here. So first thing I'm doing is blocking in some red in these lower areas here, because that is going to be our first color.
Do you trace out the cars or freehand them, at least when you were starting out? A little bit of both, I would say.
A little bit of both, and in the drafting world, it's not like tracing is a crime. So I hate to paint things in that idea. But the reality is I always drew freehand. I didn't really even bother incorporating more drafting techniques in till later in life when there were higher expectations about the accuracy of what I was doing, like commissions or build stuff. But when I was a kid, when I was learning, I drew everything from scratch, just as I am right here, or as I did with this vehicle. And I'll be honest, the reason for that really was the type of things that you need in order to trace an image. I was a kid. I couldn't afford anything. So I couldn't get a light table. I had no idea about marker papers and transparency. I didn't have a printer. Most of the drawings that I did when I was a kid came out of magazines where the picture was this big and I would blow it up. So naturally, there was a lot of mistakes. But yeah, it wasn't until later in life when I was like, you can just trace a photo? And immediately made me jealous for people that got to that stage a lot faster. And there's really nothing wrong with it. I speak a little bit against it when I talk about what I do. Reason being, it can sometimes be too much of a crutch. And I'm trying to figure out how to explain that without hurting anybody's feelings. You can still do beautiful artwork even if you don't draw that good. So it shouldn't be a hang-up from you getting started. But let's say in the case of design work or something like that, I need to be able to move things around while I'm drawing on the fly. And if I can't draw, if I don't understand the basics of drawing in the first place, I won't even be able to do my job. So it's important to know how to draw and work with the fundamentals. But it doesn't have to be something that's make or break either.
No. Like I had friends. I actually did go to art school, and I didn't start using a light table until I started to go to school. But I had friends that were like beautiful drawers. Like they would sketch out something, from their brain like instantly. But they couldn't do like computer work or any design stuff on the computer. And then I had friends on the opposite spectrum where they could do anything on the computer, but they couldn't really draw freehand, or they had to rely on the light table a lot more just to get a couple shapes out to scan into the computer. So
Yeah.
it's not hit or miss.
There's no one rule that has to apply to everyone.
Exactly.
I hate the idea of making people feel bad about tracing. The reason I don't support it a lot as maybe as much as it probably doesn't seem like I do, because I would prefer to encourage people to learn how to draw first. That's
the
all.
basics down first.
Yeah, exactly. These are fundamentals. If you know how to draw, then you can do everything. But there's a huge reality to not everybody is cut out to draw in the same way. That doesn't mean that you will be any less of a talented artist. Our approach is just going to be different. That's all. Heck, the way I'm freehanding marker, I don't think most people will do this. This is a dangerous tool to be slinging around like this. So everybody's going to have a different approach. There are tools out there that will help you save a lot of time if drawing is not your thing. I just worry about teaching artists to rely too much on it without understanding the fundamentals, especially in design work. In the case of painting portraits and stuff like that, you know what? Just get the line work on the canvas. Who cares? You're going to put paint all over it. It doesn't really, really matter. But in the case of design work, to me, it's used too much. Can be used a little bit too much as a crutch, and I don't like seeing that. But design work is a completely different thing to me than paintings and general illustrations. That's a whole different set of rules. I can't even possibly take the same approach.
Yeah.
Because the materials are different and the outcome is different, as well it should be. So hopefully you guys can see that I'm just using one marker and I'm trying to get a little bit of value out of it. And what I'm doing with the marker is creating how I think the lighting is going to flow a little bit. I want a little bit of motion. I have to leave room for the airbrushing that I'm going to do. And these particular markers, these chart packs, are super wet, so you have to move very fast with them. So layering one single marker can actually give you a ton of value range. Even though it's just one red, we're getting some deeper reds, and we're also getting some lighter reds. Eventually, you will just start chewing the paper. You'll oversaturate, and you'll actually lose some of the color vibrancy as well. So you gotta be careful. Alright. Red is actually, to me, one of the easiest colors to render. I could go into reasons. It just is. So I'm going to switch over to some of the other tones that I'm going to use for the upper color. Please feel free to ask any questions.
He said, no, I get it, but coming from an architectural background, sometimes it's hard to get into a free flow. More used to stiff, hard edge line work.
Yeah, and I can absolutely appreciate that. The same thing in some ways could be said about automotive design. You think that these are flowy lines, they should come very naturally. These are a lot easier to freehand than, say, straight lines. And I don't even really like using rulers that much in artwork and design work because things become a little bit rigid. But it's important to understand, especially, let's say, in the case of that type of design, interior design or structural design, you need to understand perspective and proportions very well. And building grids and boxes, starting that way, is incredibly important. But there's no one answer for everything, so don't take how I do something as it has to be done this way. There's people that I follow and I look up to, and I still to this day realize we have completely different approaches. And that's okay. Do what works for you. I'm like happy to provide some inspiration and some motivation, but there's no one way to do everything. And I think half the time what I do is the wrong way anyways, so I wouldn't rely on the information of how I'm doing something, because it's just some random dude drawing cars in a way that may or may not be right. So what I've got right now is Pale Indigo, another chart pack, and what I'm starting to do is the cool tone. So the two-tone I'm going to do for this is going to be red and black, which is a way more contemporary look for a absolutely classic style of Ferrari. But in order to make all these cool tones read correctly, we got to plot them all so that they're doing the same thing. So I already know the wheel style that I'm going to do. I'm still going to go with a spoked wheel. And all the upper surfaces I want to reflect a little bit blue. So let's just go ahead and jot some in with marker. A lot of this is going to get buried with airbrush. But if I start with marker, I'm saturating the paper really, really well, so I know that the undertones are going to look really, really good. And then I don't have to guess when I'm airbrushing. I already know where everything's going to go.
Do you do digital drawings, renderings also?
Oh, yes. I do a lot of work digitally. I don't post as much digital stuff, so you won't see it as much, say, on Instagram, for example. But when I'm doing build artwork for shops that are building custom cars, probably 70% of it, the final artwork will be digital. And the reason for that is, in today's world, most builders want to see 50 versions of one thing. They want to see 10 wheels and these many colors and this, that, and the other, and it's just not efficient.
Or make it two-tone.
Yeah, oh, what if we, which isn't a bad thing. It only is bad if you're broadsided by it. So if I do this beautiful render and someone's like, yeah, that's awesome. Now what if we change the wheels? Am I really going to re-render this whole thing from scratch? I absolutely could, and I would love to in some ways. But a shop is just straight up not going to pay me to keep drawing everything. And sure, there's probably examples out there where somebody's like, well, this guy gets paid to redraw them all the time. We probably don't charge the same amount of money. So what that person's getting paid to redraw stuff is not what I charge to get. So I learned years ago to use the right tool for the job, as my brother would say. And for working with builders, finishing digitally gives you a lot of room for error. But the way I like to work digitally is the same way I like to work traditionally, so that it still looks like I'm the person doing the artwork. All right, let's switch over to some gray markers here. I always keep like a big pad of markers close by. I didn't want to have them too close, guys. Whoops, bumping the camera, because I'm going to run out of space here real fast, which is why. All right, so let's see. So what I'm doing now is I'm coming up with some values for grays. Again, knowing that I'm going to pretty much, I already know how I'm going to do the wheels. Let's be real, I've done them a ton of times before. And markers are kind of like watercolor in a way. They're dye-based. So that means you have to be very intentional about what you're doing. Which also means you're not going to get a lot of space at the very end to do anything subtractive. And to some degree, you will, yes, for sure. But it has to be painted on afterwards over top of what's already here. So we want to be careful about that. Yeah, but at the same time, I also don't put colors in one way that I think they're going to be. Otherwise, none of this would make sense. I'm really making this seem a lot more complicated than it is. Sorry about
that. It takes practice.
It does, and markers and airbrush is a layering thing. I don't pick a color and go, that's going to go there. I build things up because I want to create a depth look. It's paint, it should be shiny. And there's certain aspects of the way something looks that helps it read one way or the other. And a lot of that stuff just comes from practice and experience. You can tell it's almost time for a new, whatever number this is, 5.
Keep it out so we know what to get to store.
Yeah. So here I'm just kind of plotting a darker value for the horizon look, I should say, because it's not a real horizon. But we kind of start to get just a little bit of color dance and bounce from the metal surfaces, because it's going to be more of like an alloy or a chrome-ish looking wheel. And I want to keep that in mind as I'm doing all of my reflective surfaces that have that same look. If I'm using the same markers in the same areas, they'll all read similar. And this is a gray value, so we can actually go over, let's say, the color area here, this red, real quickly. Go over the red and create that rolled bottom look. You have to be careful when doing this because you can desaturate the area pretty quickly. And in some ways, that's good. Shadows tend to be less saturated than the other areas. But you don't want to overdo it, especially with marker. Alright, so... And this is something that I could do with Airbrush just as well. I just didn't. Sometimes I just change up techniques a little bit in the way that I'm doing something, just to kind of keep things fresh and fun and interesting. And let's see, even though this red shape here is the shadow for the mirror, I'm going to get a little bit of that right at the base there with a little bit more gray, because the contrast will read a little bit better. And some of these details I will do with like color pencil or airbrush. Let's see.
That's actually the next question.
What's that?
Is Chartpak your go-to marker brand, or do you use other brands as well?
I use a lot of brands, but as a go-to, yes, absolutely. And the reason is, let's see, I can do this on camera real quick because I get a ton of questions. It's a great example. People love Copics. This is a Copic tip. This is a Chartpak tip. Look at the size difference here. If I wanted to draw big, which I absolutely prefer to, I'm going to use a bigger marker. While these are great, they're overpriced. They're not as great as people make them out to be. I like Copics for some general stuff, but if I need to fill a broad area that's really smooth, I need to use a marker that has a larger tip and then also saturates better. Chartpaks are xylene based as opposed to alcohol based. Alcohol based markers dry faster. Now the caveat to the alcohol based markers, they're generally more vibrant too. So if I was just doing just marker, I might go for just alcohol markers because I'll get this really nice overall vibrance in the end. But the reality is I'm going to do airbrushing on top of this. Some of that doesn't even matter because I'll get a lot of vibrance from how I airbrush.
And you use color pencils sometimes over top, right?
Yes, as part of the detail work, which I'll get into for sure. Keen observers will note I'm using a Chartpak calls these basics. They're essentially a light purple.
I like light purple.
Yeah, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So here's what they call a cool marker right here, and this is their basic. And oftentimes they have a bit of a purple tone to them. And you kind of think, why would that be useful? What could I possibly get out of purple? Well, purple is this really nice middle-of-the-road, warm and cool. So say I wanted to add some value to this color, the red, which I did, for example, here. Doing it with a purple kind of falls in the same family, but then I get more value out of it too, as far as darkening the area. And then just to kind of tie all the colors together. If I'm going to use something somewhere, I want to use it in a few places so that the artwork all feels connected and from the same family. But yeah, it took me a while to find a use for, why would I want to use light purple? But, oh yeah, there's a use for it. Alright, so where are we at? So the next thing that I'm going to build on, actually I'm going to grab a gray tone and kind of fill this area in here. A lot of times on the final renders, it's not dark enough. I won't bother with a lot of the details in the sketch because it doesn't matter. To me, a lot of these details are going to get painted in or done with colored pencil. So if they exist in the sketch, I'm just burying them with ink anyways. I had those little grill stripes here, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to end up painting them in with a paintbrush in the very end. So that's why the final sketch, something like this, thinner lines, less information. I've got my original drawing over here if I need to go, hey, where does this go? I've got some references. So I don't draw every single thing in for what I would consider a clean final because it won't be important. Or it won't be important in how I do it. I'm going to do a lot of it as a painted detail. That means I don't need to outline it in the beginning. I'll just paint it in the end. Now that can seem like a lot of guessing work, and in reality it is. But I've done a bazillion of these, so I know where I can guess and where I should not guess.
Jeremy Smith Studio says, what kind of paper are you using? I have trouble finding paper that won't bleed through the chart packs.
This is a great paper for that then. What I'm using, this is Canson Pro Layout marker paper. And you'll see on the back, no bleed out whatsoever. These are fantastic for that. I do use a number of other papers with chart packs that I also really like, but if you're wanting something that's 100% not going to bleed all the way through, this paper right here, Canson Pro Layout. The problem is right now, I think it's only, this is the maximum size that's available in 1417. I have a ton of large pads of this, 1924, because I prefer to work a lot bigger than this. So that's why I don't use it as much anymore, because right now this is the limiting size until they decide if they're going to produce it bigger or not. All right, next thing I'm going to do is jump into some of this interior stuff here. Let's grab the same marker I had.
Eduardo is asking, what do you think about using pastels instead of airbrush? Can achieve nice results with it?
Oh, absolutely. I think pastels are fantastic. The only reason that I don't use them is because I already know how to airbrush. So I've seen some absolutely beautiful work done with pastels. And in reality, use whatever you're really comfortable with. If the materials are going to stress you out, it's going to show in your artwork. So do whatever really makes it work for you. I know a lot of guys that will use colored pencils in all the places that I would use airbrush as their blending technique. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's not a right or wrong answer at all for any of this. But that's why I say the only reason that I do airbrush is because I was airbrushing and doing custom paint full-time for years before I switched over into artwork. And then it made sense for me to take what I knew and use it in my artwork. But yeah, by all means, use whatever makes the most sense to you. That isn't going to stress you out to learn. Airbrushing, I think, is very easy. But the more people I talk to about it, the more I realize it's not that straightforward. And the only reason I feel like it's easy is because I've been doing it for 15 years. So it's complicated. You have to buy a lot of materials to get it set up. A lot can go wrong. Sometimes in these live demonstrations, the airbrushing goes wrong. So knowing how to handle those mistakes. Whereas using something like chalk pastels, you're still going to get a beautiful transition, a lot of reversibility, great color vibrancy with one tool, simple setup. So there's no wrong answer. Use what makes sense for you. I will say, the one caveat I would say to that, because I used chalks a little bit in the very early days of getting started doing this full time, about 8 years ago. And what I noticed is that the big difference between airbrush and chalk is that the chalk will pick up the grain of the paper, whereas airbrush will be smooth pretty much no matter what paper you put it down to. It's such a fine film that it will take a coarse paper and smooth it out pretty well, but a chalk can be really grainy, especially if you overblend. Marker papers tend to be very smooth, so it's not as grainy, but it's also the reason I don't do a lot of color pencil work. I don't like grainy look in my art. But everybody different. Alright, so I got a little bit of interior there. I basically just block it in with a gray, and now I'm going to start to do the colors up here.
Jeremy Smith Studio says, awesome, thanks.
You're very welcome.
And Alan wants to know, what is your opinion on blenders? Do you use them?
Blenders as far as markers or color pencils?
Maybe both, because he's just asking your opinion on blenders in general.
Gotcha. Well, if I don't use them for color pencil work because I don't use color pencils in that way, so I wouldn't be able to give you a good frame of reference there. But if we're talking about with markers, I actually do use blending markers sometimes. So much of my artwork is finished with airbrush, there's not a need to. I try to keep the marker really tight so I have some space to airbrush into. But if I'm doing something that's all marker, I will use blenders. I think they're misused a lot in artwork. I think people are confused about what they do and how to use them, and that will probably be worth doing its own video, to be honest. Because there's some weird information, or they're not really used for blending, technically. They can be used to blend stuff, but in reality, you don't smear a blender marker all over an area you want to blend. There's a lot more that goes into the thought process, but I'm not quite doing that in this video, so it'd be good for a demo in a different video. Just starting to get some values in the back shading areas. My number 7's a little worn out there, so I'm gonna, yep, there we go, something nice and saturated. Underneath the car always has some of these little technical details in them, and I like to do them really, really quickly, but leaving them out or not showing a little bit of the bottom of the car makes it look like a really weird two-dimensional cutout that doesn't belong there. So you gotta be careful. You know, so far I haven't used any rulers or any curves. I did use some curves to shape up some of my final lines because I want to get them in single passes. But I haven't used any of that stuff yet. I will as we tighten up into details. But initially, I like the color reflection and the flow to feel really natural and organic. So I saved kind of the tighter stuff for the end. And we're actually jamming along pretty good here, but this kind of car is a lot more detail heavy towards the end, so probably speaking a little bit soon.
Skipping ahead.
Yeah, as far as being optimistic anyways. I always think things are going faster than they are.
I'm not really keeping an eye on the time, so for all I know, you are being fast.
Who knows? Let's just pretend like we're not paying attention. I always feel like we're on a time crunch when we do these live videos, because more often than not, we're doing them on Instagram. And Instagram has a 60-minute cutoff. So after 60 minutes, you get booted. And that's fine, but that means I'm constantly looking at the clock going, oh man, do we have enough time? Do we have enough time? Do we have enough time? Whereas YouTube and Facebook, they're just like, yeah, keep going, man. It's all good. So, yeah, there's that. All right, so the next thing, actually, I'm going to grab a black marker. And you guys will see that I actually like to keep this. This is some of my test pattern stuff. But the paper is also super, super smooth. I can use it as a guide to run my hand across. So when you have a bunch of different materials going on your surface, dragging your hand across it, one, can smear materials, especially pen or pencil or paint that's not fully dried. And then you'll get a bunch of trash on the back of your hand, and ultimately you'll start putting prints all over this thing. And who knows, if you're lucky, I might even get to do that here today. Inevitably, sometimes it happens, especially when I'm working fast in a demo like this. The paper is solid white for, so everything looks like a defect, unless you do it on purpose. So having another piece of paper, marker paper, super, super smooth to run my hand across, make sure that the surface always feels consistent and I'm not putting more trash and contaminating the drawing. Something similar to what I learned when I was doing pinstriping full time. You put a tape guide down or put a glove on so that the surface always feels consistent. When you're freehanding marker, if you're hitting bumps or you're changing direction as you go, everything you do will be shown in the marker that you do. So you want these smooth, consistent passes, overlap them, 50-50 overlap, just as you would if you were doing it with a paint gun or something like that. But because you're dragging your hand, you're relying on the surface that you're on to be like, it's like the braille of your thing. So smooth as possible. It's also why this particular drawing is inside the marker pad. I know that there's nothing trashy or bumpy underneath. If I was doing it on this table, it would look freaking terrible. Yeah, this is like a volcano. It's the worst thing ever. It's good as tables go. If I were to rant and rave about tables. But so the surface that you're drawing on plays a huge role in the look. A lot of times if I have to do something super, super refined, I'll actually take this piece of paper and put it on a plate of super clean glass.
Shauna Kennedy, or Shanna? Sheena says hi.
Hi, Shayna.
And Alan's asking, to learn to get good with airbrushing, do you need to be a good drawer?
No. As a matter of fact, they're very, very different principles, which can be a benefit or a curse. No, because when you're airbrushing, and I'll show you guys because I am going to airbrush on this one, your hand is on the surface a little bit, and you are using it as a guide in the same way that I'm describing with the markers. But what you're doing is a very different thing, and probably the way that I'm doing it is incredibly unusual. Because I'm not going to do any masking. I'm relying on my freehand skills to do as much of the heavy lifting as possible. But do you need to be good at drawing? Absolutely not. Because it's its own thing.
That's its own practice.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's probably harder than just plain drawing.
But don't get discouraged from trying it.
Yeah, it is difficult to do, but don't treat it like drawing. There are artists that I follow that will draw with an airbrush, and if I'm doing a canvas painting, I might do my sketch with an airbrush, depending on what it is I'm doing. But true of anything, don't do something that's going to frustrate you or stress you out during the process, because it will show in your artwork. Make sure you're doing something that you're comfortable with. So learn it or practice it on something that doesn't matter, and get comfortable with the mistakes and understand what they do, because airbrush is awesome. I love it, and you'll see it'll make stages of this go super, super fast. But it's not for everybody, so it doesn't have to be your answer either. But there's a lot that I do that would probably be considered unorthodox, let's be real. I'm still freehanding all this marker. I don't think that's what they teach you in school.
Oh no, it's always changing.
That is true, it is always changing. Because in reality, if you wanted something that was more precise, you would want to use tools to create the precision. But I like a little bit of hand-doneness in the way that I draw. I like something that looks like it was done by a person. That does mean that I'm going to make mistakes, and I have to figure out how to manage those mistakes. But I want to get better at making less bad mistakes, if that makes any sense at all. Yeah. Because if you just... I don't know, I don't want to get too carried away with saying something that's misleading, but your artwork should look like something that's done by you. How you do something, your style, your materials, your technique, is ultimately your trademark. It's your style. When you want people to be able to see your artwork and go, that was definitely done by that guy. That's not always the case with the stuff that I do. Sometimes the stuff that I do, somebody will be like, man, it looks like Chip Foose, or it looks like Steve Stanford, and it's certainly not an insult to me. Those people are my heroes. But everybody feels differently about stuff like that. I don't know how they like being confused with me. I don't think it's probably not a compliment for them.
Aw, I don't think that's true.
We'll never know. Well, actually, that's not true. We'll not never know. We will know. One day. Alright. Even though I already grayed this area, I'm actually going to go over it again with a darker gray, because I'm trying to catch the values up a little bit. What's up?
Oh, no, I was just going to go on to the next thing.
Question.
What is the setting for your pictures for Instagram, and what camera?
Oh, geez. Now, there's an elaborate question.
Yeah.
You guys are going to love the answer of this, because it's as complicated as everything else that I do. So on social media, when I'm posting photos, I never use my phone's camera because it's inferior. No, I'm just kidding. The way I want to photo stuff requires a little bit more finesse. I need the pictures to be as accurate a representation of what I'm doing as possible. And I just don't like relying on my phone for stuff like that. So I actually use a DSLR. I'll either use a Canon or a Nikon DSLR. And I'll shoot a few frames as I'm wrapping up. So I'll shoot it. It's obviously a 16:9 aspect ratio. Crop it down to something that's usable for Instagram, which is 4:5 or 1:1 aspect ratio. Do a little bit of color correction to get it to look like the actual drawing. Make sure it's accurate as possible. And then, and I do all that on the computer in, say, Photoshop. Put that into my phone and then post. It's a bit of a process. It's not super straightforward. But how you show people your artwork says a lot about your artwork. If you're taking cheap photos or bad photos, you're doing yourself a disservice. Alright, so got all these areas are already plotted out with marker. The next thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to cut the wheels and tires out, even though they're basically blanks right now. All that stuff is going to come in at the details as I'm going. So, I'm going to grab a Sharpie here and just make my life a little bit easier, because I don't need a super saturating marker to cut out black. And one thing you guys might notice is that when I'm rendering the body colors and even parts of the wheel, I'm running straight into the fender well. And you might think, that's super sloppy. Why would you do that? I'm going to go over it with black. It's all going to get buried. You're never going to see it. So to me, this is a great way to save a step so that I can make these passes as quickly as possible so that they seem as smooth as possible. Starting and stopping on edges and lines like that, to me, does not look attractive. And sometimes when I see artists, they'll do these fender wells or the wheels first, and that confuses the heck out of me too. But it's because of my own technique. I'm going to drag marker from one fender well to the next which means in marker terms, if this was black already, you'll be picking up some black and smearing it all the way across your drawing. Do not want that. At least not in the technique that I'm using. I'm not saying that people don't pull it off and don't do a good job. It's just not how I work.
Alan says, your artwork is awesome, so don't go there. Chip and Steve have great art too.
They sure do.
Roberto wants to know, can we use a ballpoint pen instead of a marker to define the weather strips or the window frames?
Absolutely. And in the initial sketch, I did that here, very, very lightly. But yes, you can. I'd say the biggest trick with that is what type of markers you're using and at what stage you do the line work. So I will shape up a lot of these details with Bic at the very end, a ballpoint pen, as opposed to Copic liners or something like that. I really don't like using those types of pens. I will in certain cases, but I rarely do. I just like the way Bic pen looks. But Bic pen on its own isn't necessarily light fast, and if you end up using some marker over top of it, it'll smear. So it's fine as long as it's as long as it's intentional. So I actually prefer to tighten up details with the pen, because to me it's a lot more predictable. Alright, so I use these ellipse tools to plot out the wheel to begin with, so I already know what size they're going to be and whatnot, and this saves a ton of time at this stage of cutting out the wheel. I could freehand around this if I wanted to, but if we're trying to save time and be productive, I've got the tools that speed up the process. So now I've got the outlines. All I got to do is fill it and blend the edges here. Easy peasy. Let's see. Alright, so. And then once I start to get like the fenders, like the fender cutouts in, or the areas that I know I'm actually going to use black, then at this stage I'll be able to start to see the balance or imbalance of contrast. So I'll know when I'm airbrushing, okay, these areas need to be a little bit darker, or maybe I need to make some more passes with marker here or there in order to balance out the values. Now that we have bright paper white and as solid black as this will probably get, I know the two extremes, and I might start to rebalance the image in order to accommodate where the contrast is at right now.
How do you save your art to make the renderings last?
I assume that's more like using fixative or how they're stored.
Yes.
The ones that I keep in a folder so they don't see natural sunlight. I try to keep a piece of paper like this in between them so that they don't touch each other. If you watch my last video, you can tell that it's not always true. A lot of the drawings are just layered on top, but I also have a million drawings. But if I was going to hang something on the wall or stuff that I do sell to people that they do hang, you know, the better glass it's in always helps. If you can afford something that's like museum glass, that really, really helps. But the longevity of something has to do with a few factors. The markers themselves, I doubt, are light fast. This paper, I think, is pH neutral, but I think it also has artificial brighteners in it, which probably won't last super, super long. So that's a wild card. True of all original artwork, if even framing it, hanging it, don't hang it away from direct sunlight. Will always help. Humidity with paper that's this thin will cause it to wrinkle and warp, and it will go back into place, but just keep it away from sunlight is really the best thing.
Roberto says thank you about the ballpoint pen question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Eduardo wants to know if you draw motorcycles too.
I do sometimes. It's rare because it's just not a part of my life. I have a lot of friends that are big into motorcycles, but it's not something I get requests to do, and it's hardly something I would consider quick.
A little more detailed.
Yeah, there's a lot more going on in a motorcycle. But I do love motorcycles. I love motorcycle design. It's just not something that I do a lot of. Starting to get this balance going here pretty good.
Looking good.
That's good. Thank you, thank you. Then we've got a good look. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the centers. Same way, just going to grab the same ellipse tool. And just try to run around this real quick with the inside and the outside. Just make sure I don't do this wrong twice, which probably won't happen. And usually with quick stuff, you know, there's a bit of room for error, and especially because I paint in a lot of details at the end. Anything that I'm like, I missed this or went too far that way with the thing, I'll just mix up some paint and paint the detail back in towards the end. For something that's quick like this, I try not to waste too much time on what I call recovering details, because you can burn a ton of time that way. And if it's intended to be quick, you know, figure out what that means to you. If quick is all day, and not great. But I'm certainly guilty of being saying that I'm going to knock something out real quick, and one day later, still working on it. It happens. Alright, we'll fill this guy in. And from there, I think we'll be just about ready for airbrush. I want to do one more thing before we start airbrushing. I also have to mix up paints. Normally I pre-mix before these videos, but I haven't done one here on YouTube in months, so I had to very quickly reacquaint myself with our streaming software, and yeah, it took more time than I thought I was going to. So, whoops.
Whoops it is.
But hey, live and learn. If we do these more frequently, then it's a lot harder to forget.
Plus mixing paints doesn't take that much time.
What's that?
Mixing
Oh
paints
yeah,
doesn't take too much time.
you're totally right. It's moments. So yeah, the other thing that I want to do before I jump into airbrush, because we're looking good here, I've got all the hollow spots ready to receive some airbrush. But I want to see if I had any warm grays on hand here. Oh, I found one. So that I can, let's see, make sure this is good. You can tell obviously this is very warm. I don't even know why they call it a gray. It's basically like a pale yellow. So that we can get a little bit of warmness down here. In a traditional rendering technique, you might notice that there's a bit of yellow at the bottom, or a bit of brown, or something like that. And of course the reason for that is ground tones are warmer than sky tones, which are cooler. So, and the more you imply that in the artwork, the more reflective a paint surface looks. Or a wheel, for example. Plus, you can add a little bit of motion and a little bit of speed to it. Alright, we're jamming. I'm going to set that one aside so I remember where it is and I can reuse it. But from here, we're actually ready to jump into the airbrushing. So I'm going to touch one thing up real quick. And the first thing that I'm going to do, or the first part that I'm going to airbrush, is the body color. I could do the blacks and the cools first. The reason on this one that I'm going to do the red first is because if I've got the black or the blue mixed up and the red's done, then I can add a little bit of black or blue on top of the red that's done if I need to create some color shift or some contrast. At least I'm kind of going in order rather than jumping back and forth. So, excuse me just a moment while I get set up with some airbrushy stuff. Again, if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to ask. I know I've already got a clean airbrush here. I've got color set aside. Somewhere, there we go. And what I'm going to use for airbrushing today is golden fluid acrylics. There's a few different airbrush paints that I absolutely love to use. Goldens are one of my favorites. Createx illustration colors are awesome. The only reason, or one of the reasons I'm using these for this today, is just because where I'm at and the kind of speed that I'm kind of going. If I had time to prep the colors, I'll mix these over top of the drawing. That way you guys can sweat and hope that I don't spill it. if I had a little bit more time to mix colors, I probably would have used Createx, because I really, really love their colors. But they need to mix and sit for a few minutes before they can be used, and I just didn't have enough extra time. So, let's grab a couple of things here.
Well, Nicholas Riddell wants to know since when have you been drawing?
I've been drawing since I was about 5 or 6. So forever.
Forever ago.
Yeah, and I've actually, when I was a kid, I remember in 1st grade, I did a drawing of my grandma's car. She had a Toyota Celica GT at the time. Would have been like an 88. And I remember that from 1st grade. I've always drawn cars. The only other things that I really drew were like trains. Of course I don't have any paper towels in here. Why would I?
Hang on, I'll hold you.
Thank you. Alright, so what I'm using there is Airbrush medium. Stick with the same chemical brands. And so I can get a little bit more fluidity out of this. And then I'll do a test spray, make sure it's what I need. And if I need to thin it down a little bit more, I will. So, just going to pour a little bit of the airbrush there. Make sure the airbrush is functioning correctly. It's a little on the heavy side, but actually it's okay. And these paints, thank you, are super vibrant, so we won't have to get super carried away. Let's see what I'm using, HPCH. I have a couple of different airbrushes I use, depending on what it is I'm doing. But this is kind of my go-to for this type of thing. So, turn the air pressure up a little bit. What I'm going to do is kind of blend these areas together. But I'm not trying to paint it solid red. These are transition areas where the lighting is changing. So I don't need a ton of paint in there. And you could do this with, say, a pink marker. And sometimes I will if I don't have a ton of time. But the difference will be the vibrancy, for sure. Acrylic paint sitting on top of the page is going to be way more vibrant than a marker, which is part of why I'm going over some of the marker artwork to kind of bring a little bit of that vibrancy into it. It probably won't show up on camera, but that's okay. And of course, want to be careful not to go too wet. I probably want a little bit wet there because you can warp the paper at the same time. Going just a little bit wet here, but that's okay.
Nicholas said, me too, but I am 21. Greetings from Germany.
Hey, hello from Southern California.
What part of Germany, if I may ask?
Yeah, what part of Germany are you in?
I've got some friends from Chile here, and
Ooh, nice.
Where's everyone else from?
Yeah, where is everybody else from today? So already we're getting a really nice soft shift from the hard lines into the open areas. And again, I don't want to just color everything in. You know, I want to transition from one area to the next. And I normally don't do masking, especially on these quick renders. One is time, but I've learned to really like the open edge look of some of the airbrushing. Now in this area, we're actually going to end up with a little bit of a divot where the body tightens up a little bit. So we're going to go a little bit heavier in there, just to kind of push that shape a little bit.
Very nice. He's near Stuttgart. That's
Nice.
where I was born. Awesome.
That's where my car was made.
Yay! Alan said he was in SoCal, right? I think it's your head.
I don't remember.
He says, so you're in SoCal too? What
Nice.
part? We are in the very southern part of Orange County.
Yeah. So hopefully you can see in just a matter of a few minutes and a little bit of airbrushing. Again, you could totally do this with chalk pastels, but it's just, I like airbrushing, I like the softness, and I like the speed. Once you know how to mix the colors and how to use them, you can get a lot more out of them. And again, the material is sitting on top of the paper, so it has a bit more vibrancy to it. So actually that's good. I like where all the red is on that. I'm gonna pour out the paint, and you don't have to worry, it's dry already. It's acrylic, dries in seconds. Pour out this paint and mix up another one. So the next thing I'm gonna mix up is blue, because I want to have some of those reflective surfaces before I add the black to it. Make sure to clean out the red first. Sorry. All these noises are probably super irritating to listen to, but or not. Who knows? Alright. Done with the red for now. Switch over. We're going to grab another container. And today we'll use a little bit indigo blue. We won't need a whole lot of this, so it's not like a ton has to be mixed up. Again, go with the airbrush medium. Mix these guys up and just kind of see what the strength is. You can, to some degree, you can reduce airbrush paints with water. One of the reasons I don't tend to do that for traditional illustrations like this is because you'll saturate the paper and it'll warp and it'll stay that way forever. And you don't want that, because it'll make some of the detail stages really, really difficult if the paper is warped and you're trying to freehand clean lines on it. Because all this that we're doing is all mostly freehand and pretty lackadaisical, because we want it to feel freeform and organic. All the detail tightening happening towards the end is where the image starts to tighten up and come together. And you could do that from beginning to end. You could mask everything, you can use the tools, and you will get a super perfect, super crisp looking piece. And obviously there's nothing wrong with that. I like a little bit more a little bit more free flow in the pieces that I do. Alright, so here's the blue, which is a little bit strong, but I might need it to show up better on camera anyway, so we're just going to jump right into it.
Let's just jump right in.
Alright, make sure the lid is on. We don't want blue exploding everywhere. And we're basically going to go over everything we already did.
Alan said he grew up in Orange County.
Nice.
Placentia.
Gotcha, gotcha. Don't really spend much time over there.
Well, we're still exploring.
Yeah.
We moved here from Maryland 8 years ago.
Yeah.
We're still kind of exploring just the southern area.
It is true. So while I've got the blue out, again, what I was saying about mixing colors in order and using them, this is really more of an efficiency thing. I've got the blue out. Now I can also go ahead and hit the wheels where I think they need to have a little bit more blue. And I'm going over the marker I've got, and you might think, well, why not just do this with airbrush in the first place? You absolutely can. One of the reasons that I'm doing it this way is if I do it with markers while I'm doing all the marker stuff, I've already got it plotted in my mind. I don't have to think about where it needs to go. I just kind of follow the roadmap that I made for myself. And, you know, as long as all these blues match, they'll feel like they came from the same family. That's good. We want that. And you can go a little bit heavier in the saturation if you want to. You know, it's kind of personal preference. But me knowing what the next stages are, I know that where I can start and stop with stuff like this, because I'm going to go over half of that just with black. So there's no reason to get too carried away. So clean out the blue carefully.
Carefully.
Yeah. Actually, I don't have to clean it all the way out of the airbrush. Again, the next color I'm doing is black, so it will absorb everything you want to throw at it. Mm-hmm. So grab another cup.
Nicholas said, it is fascinating how fast you draw. I work on a picture for over 10 hours for a car.
Nice. Well, 10 hours actually sounds pretty fast to me too. But everybody's different. I know people that will, or I know other artists I should say, that will work on something for a week. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just a high volume type of person. I think because I came from a shop setting, I'm used to being ridiculed for not being fast enough. So in my mind, I need to be faster all the time. Just mixing up some of the black, and you might have noticed I grabbed a little bit of the blue from there. Probably not enough, but that's okay. Let's see what we got here.
Alan says, well, from California, different from back east, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, people are like, don't you miss the seasons? Not really.
Just gotta go north for the seasons.
Yeah. It's kind of cool to be in a place where you can intentionally go to whatever season you want to see that day. I like that. Alright, just trying to get the strength of this black correct. Because this is one of those colors that is strong no matter what. So you have to dilute it to get the balance. And naturally, most black paints lean a little bit warm. And if you just use them straight out of the bottle, they'll look kind of dirty. So I usually add a little bit of blue, whatever I'm using on the car, so that the colors come from the same family. It's going to be a very small thing to notice or not notice, but to me it's important. Alright, so grab the airbrush. This actually goes faster if you pre-mix everything, but
It's all good.
yeah.
I think you're going pretty fast.
We are where we are. So, let's see. Blue. That's great. Perfect. So, obviously it probably just looks gray. In reality, and in terms of black, especially with airbrushing, you want to build up to it. If it's too aggressive, then all you're going to do is bury everything that you've already done. And in some ways, it probably looks like that's what I'm doing anyways. I'm just being deliberate because I have a very reduced color. So I'm putting it where I want. But it's transparent, so it's going over the blue base that I have there, which was way more vibrant. You would have noticed before I put the black on, it was very vibrant. In reality, it was too vibrant. It's nice to have that background blue glow, but there's a certain stage when colors are so vibrant, they look bad. So you have to be careful. Because if you make something too vibrant, it can come across as cartoony. Alright, plenty of paint in there, so I'm going to let that dry a little bit. And the acrylics also dry really, really fast, so you just kind of build slowly and kind of transition the marker hard shapes into down or up or whichever direction you want to go. And simultaneously I can get just a little bit of softness into these edge areas here. I don't get too carried away. Just a little bit. Just to create a little bit more contrast. And maybe the bottom of the rocker here. Again, just kind of balancing contrast a little bit. Because I have the darkest darks down and I have the lightest lights. So now it's a matter of balancing everything. And then maybe also taking some of these marker areas that aren't fully blended and going over with a little bit of airbrush. Maybe the ground line gets a teeny little bit of airbrush. Just to kind of soften it up a little bit. Not much. But now it's starting to look like something. Or at least now it's starting to look more like what I intended it to look like. It's good. A little bit deeper in the core color here. And actually might come back and grab a little bit of blue over top of this. But I want to do those passes a little bit at a time so that I'm not just warping the heck out of the paper. So while I'm waiting for like that area to dry or that area to dry, which will only take moments, I'm jumping around to another area so that I'm not just overworking an area to death. And I don't mind going a little bit high contrast on something like this. So go over the shadows a little bit. I generally prefer to use the marker for all the hard shapes and the airbrush for all the soft transitions. You could do everything with either or. It's just my preference. And maybe you can imagine, I'm not sure, I'm not using a photo reference for any of this stuff. So I'm lighting it and doing everything in my mind how I think it should be. And I've done enough of these to know, or at least what I think I would want to know, or to render it how I want to see it. So we're actually looking really, really good here. I'll probably darken that up maybe with a little bit of pencil or something like that, but I'm going to swap out the black and see if I've got any blue left, and hit some of that upper area just a teeny tiny little bit more.
Roberto is asking if it's okay to use alcohol with acrylics so it dries faster.
You can. Actually, I used to, per a recommendation from Steve Stanford, because that was one of the many things he mixes into his paints to make his stuff work. So you can. I think, so you can use rubbing alcohol, but what the caveat is, you're breaking the structure of the paint. You're doing something that it's not intended to do, so it will work, but I think I couldn't possibly tell you what it's going to do long term as far as light fastness, retaining its saturation, grip on the page, stuff like that. Working on paper or illustration board is a little bit more forgiving, but you're essentially introducing something into the chemistry that's not supposed to be there. It does physically work. It will make it dry faster, but not all acrylics like the interaction of alcohol. You might see that it'll ball up or bead up while you're mixing it. It's because the chemistry isn't communicating with it, with what you're trying to do. So some of them can handle that a little bit better than others, and you want to add just a little bit of a time and see what it does. If you just douse it, you might kill it. Alright, switching back to a little bit of blue here. I'm going to come back over this area just a little bit more. I'm going to get a little bit more blue haze out of the very, very edge. So that we have that nice, like, good core blue-black. And then while I'm here, I can start to look at other areas and go, do I need more saturation here, there, or otherwise? And actually, this looks really good. If anything, the red that I use for the airbrush, that's really, really bright. But one of the things that makes something look glossy is saturation. But you have to know when to use saturation and when to use desaturation in order for things to read correctly. So I'm just going to add a little bit more, and then we'll start doing some of the erasing. And we'll start tightening up some of this detail work. Alright, so empty out the blue.
He says thank you.
You're very welcome. So if you are going to use something like alcohol, you would, let's see what I got over there. Over there is 70%, and that is probably a better place to start. The 90 and plus gets really, really aggressive, and most of the paints won't mix with that. At least 70% is a little bit less aggressive. Again, you're still asking the paint chemistry to do something that it's not designed to do, but it will work. So I'm just trying to find part of my airbrush. Alright, so we clean out the airbrush, and then we'll take a look at where we're at. Well, you guys can see where I'm at while I'm cleaning out the airbrush.
What?
Airbrush noises. I'll set these paints aside so that I don't accidentally bump into them and pour paint all over everything.
Yeah, that might be good.
Because that's never happened. I've never done that. I would never. Alright, so leave you over here where you're safe. And move all my paints off the table where I'll accidentally bump into them later. And just kind of want to get all the liquids off the table so that I can start to move a bit more comfortably. Make sure my hands are dry. You can see I've got plenty of contaminated stuff all over my hands, which is a big part of why I use the paper as a backer or something like that. Or at least today I remembered to do that. I don't always. Alright, so let's see. These are acrylics, so they dry fast. Like, we're good to go here. All I needed was a little bit of time to clean up. So one of the things that helps you be a more efficient artist is knowing kind of the distance and time between pieces and parts of the process. If you understand that this is going to take a few seconds to dry, so I can jump over here and work on this, or I can clean out the airbrush while this is drying, or I can switch tools, then something's always happening while something else is happening, so you get these overlapping processes that keep things moving along. And let me tell you, in art, efficiency is everything. Alright, so now I'm going to go over to my toolbox here and try to find some tools, believe it or not. So this is definitely one of those things where I would have been more prepared if stuff, but here we are.
It's all good.
Yeah. So one of the other cool things about airbrushing on these types of papers is that you can also work subtractive. And what I mean by that, grab my paper so I'm not contaminating everything again, is that you can actually erase overspray, for example. Especially on a paper like this that is incredibly smooth. And the Createx paints that would have been great to use for this demo are designed to be what's called reversible, or for subtractive highlighting. So you can actually remove all this. Now, you cannot remove 100% of the overspray, and I did this freehand and I've had a lot of practice. So how I'm putting paint down and where the overspray is going is a lot more deliberate because I've got practice. Of course, always use a brush to remove stuff from the thing. You don't want to use the back of your hand. It's contaminated. You'll just contaminate the drawing. So I also like that subtractive methods kind of soften the edge of the line. I'm probably going to end up highlighting that anyway, so it'll add some rigidity back to it, but I like that I can do that within my own control rather than being stuck with something. But I was very careful about how I used overspray on that. And let's see, I can even pull, it might be a little bit more obvious if I pull an edge out here.
LaCree Fine Art says, "Oh my god, this looks so awesome."
Hey! I've been watching so many of your videos, I'm stoked that you're here to watch one of mine.
Did I say that right?
I think so.
LaCree?
Yes, I think. Pretty sure. Welcome! When I was watching Lisa's video, I guess it would have been yesterday, the day before, the strawberry, I immediately thought, man, I should do a video rendering a strawberry. Maybe that's something that people can relate to a little bit better as far as just using markers and airbrush and pencils. Because I was watching her video going, man, the process that I use is so different versus picking colors because they belong there. I just kind of layer stuff until I think it looks right, which is a delicate balancing act, and I don't always get it right. Alright, so there isn't actually that much to subtract from this one as far as the subtractive thing I was just referring to. So I'm going to clear off some of the materials that I'm using so I can switch over to what's next. From here, we're going to get into color pencil and paint for final details. Now you'll notice, like, I had some blue in here from the marker, I had some gray in here from the marker, I had some other grays in here from the marker, and a lot of that gets covered up with airbrush. You could do that with airbrush, but for me, the more I do with marker, the less I have to do with airbrush. But I want to figure out which tool is going to do the job as best as possible. I don't necessarily like to use one thing for everything because at some point you're making compromises. Alright, so clear off the table a little bit here. Hopefully without anything catching fire.
Eduardo wants to know if you're going to do teaching techniques in a course or something. Like
a class?
Yeah.
That'd be a really interesting idea. I've wondered about that through the many years. I always feel like what I do is antiquated. Everybody wants to learn how to draw digital, and I love working that way too. And but in today's world, is there any use for learning how to do this on paper? I don't really know.
So.
I think in some ways the fundamentals are always going to be important. You're always knowing how to do some of this stuff is great, but I don't know. I guess I would like to. I just wonder if there's enough people that would be interested in something like that for it to be worth doing. We thought about putting together like a Patreon or something like that, but Not that I have enough time to do anything additional on top of what I'm already doing. What if I thought enough people wanted to learn? A good friend of mine, Max, keeps trying to encourage me to write a book, an instructional book, a little bit more perspective, a little bit more how-to. It's not a bad idea. So, I'm going to grab some colored pencils that you cannot see because I'm off camera right now. You can't see me anyways because of reasons. Because I'm a ghost. Sorry.
We've been watching too many ghost videos.
I've been doing too much of everything. So, if I had my own way, I'm sure somebody's going to ask about the colored pencils I'm going to use. If I had my own way, I would be using polychromos for this entire thing. And I absolutely will be for the black and white. Those are the highest contrast details in the case of what I'm doing here. But I don't think I have a full set of them right here, right now. So I'm going to use a little bit of everything to accomplish the job. Sometimes in art, especially drafting, commission, or concept stuff, your client doesn't want to hear that you can't get to the art store that day because you don't have a certain purple. They don't care. They will find somebody else. So learning to work with what you have, at least in the case of concept artwork, can be really, really important. Not that I'm really making any big compromises here. This is a demo, but still, nobody wants to hear that you're out of something. So we generally keep a small art supplies worth of materials here at all times. Because you never know what you're going to need, and I like working in like 10,000 different mediums. So, there's that. Alright, so...
Well, Lisa said, man, mine isn't that planned.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
That's what she said.
Interesting. Makes me feel better.
Maybe that was her intention.
Maybe. I certainly appreciate that. So one of the things that I do with pencil, especially on drawings like this to me is a small drawing. We're on 1417 paper. So you can sharpen to your heart's content, and it will just chew through one of these pencils, or worse if you have a Prismacolor, which some of this I'll do later. So in order to keep these fresh, I actually use a piece of sandpaper. And just sharpen a little bit more as I go that way, so that I can keep the lines a little bit tighter. It won't be perfect the whole time, and that's okay. But if I just keep sharpening it, I'm just going to chew through the pencil. So I'm going to get this a little bit darker. And I could do this with marker, or I could have just kept going with the airbrush. But again, eventually you got to learn how to use each tool for its best purpose. And in this case, I just think this works really good to do some of these final details this way. Of course, learn stuff like this by watching videos of Steve Stanford and Chip Foose. Now I'm going to carry the black over into the ducktail here.
Alan said you might find that some older folks would be interested in classes.
That's really interesting.
It's kind of like hand-drawn architectural drawings versus computer-generated work. The hand-drawn work has much more character.
In some ways, that's definitely true. I also really love working digitally as well. But when I think about art, it's not how I think of art. So when I hear someone say, here's a great story. I didn't even get a chance to tell you this, but this is great. When I had a business meeting a couple of weeks ago with some people I'm working with for a new shop and apparel, and one of the guys was telling me the story about how one of his clients bought an original piece of artwork, and it was on a flash drive.
Sorry.
He's gonna go check on the doggos.
Hey, stop.
Doggos are friggin' out.
They hear something outside.
Yeah. Alright, so, guy bought an original piece of artwork that was on a flash drive. Right?
To the meeting?
In the meeting, he was telling me about this.
Okay.
That, yeah, this other client that he was meeting, while he was meeting with them, he bought an original piece of artwork that was on a flash drive. In fact, it was 3 pieces, and I believe he said it was around $15,000.
Say what now?
Right. That's just the world we live in. It's a different time. And we're here. This is what's happening. So, obviously there's a great place, lots of space for digital art, but I struggle with it a little bit as an original medium. I guess because I'm rooted in traditional, it seems a little bit odd to me. But that doesn't make me right or them wrong or anything like that. Times change with artwork, so it just kind of is what it is. I love working digitally as well, but when I'm thinking about original stuff, I'm thinking about something I can physically give to people when, somebody's paying for my time.
Well, I mean, I can kind of see that. Like, they put all the work into the computer on their flash drive.
100%, yeah.
Like, once they have it, they can do anything with it. A lot of media now, like anything with ads or, posters or anything like that, it's all digital.
Yeah.
So I can kind of see that. But it's funny that he got this original artwork, but they didn't even print or give him a frame to go with it.
That's why I say it's just kind of the world we live in now. There's nothing wrong with it, but as a traditional artist, and I do work digitally, I just want to keep saying that I do work digitally, but as a traditional artist, you just kind of stare at somebody and blink really slowly when you hear a story. Well, no, that's probably what I did, because I was like, what? Sometimes you hear stories like that and you go, man, what am I doing wrong? But you never know who's on the forefront of stuff. And just because one person is successful at it doesn't mean everybody can be successful at it.
That is true.
So some people are just that extreme case, and some people are just more well known, or plenty of people are more well known. And you could buy a piece of toast from them for $50,000. That's just, again, that's the world we live in.
Or a banana.
It's weird. Speaking of random famous people and celebrities, Lisa, if you're still there, I enjoyed your rant the other day about Kristen Stewart.
What did you say about Kristen Stewart?
So many things, and I don't want to repeat them. Because we, as with a lot of people, we don't all share the same opinions and stuff, and I'm not saying that I disagree. I'm just saying it was fun to listen to. So I'm going back and forth between white pencils and black pencils, and essentially just correcting some of the edges and lines here. I think about, with the way that I work, I think about what I call detail or line recovery as part of the process. I went a little bit too far with marker, or there's a little bit of overspray, let's say on the mirror here. I'm just going to come back in with pencil or paint later and paint over those areas. Now you could go in and out of them carefully with marker or airbrush. You could mask it. All those things are great approaches to it. But in my mind, I always think about speed and end result. If I'm doing this for a customer, what can I get done within a reasonable amount of time, depending on how much they're paying. And at the end result, does it make a difference if I masked it versus I painted it later? Who knows? What's that?
She said she's my favorite.
I can tell. I can tell that you're a huge fan. You are the chapter president of the Kristen Stewart fan club. People are going to rewatch this video and be like, what are they talking about?
No.
And what's funny is because we're not talking about it, so we're not really talking about anything.
No.
I think when I was listening to her talk about that, I was like, I almost commented, Kristen Stewart has joined the chat. Your video has been demonetized or something like that. People are crazy, man. Crazy.
I don't think she got that much.
What's that?
I don't think Kristen Stewart has that much free time.
You're right. She doesn't seem like a type of person that would be hanging out on YouTube, really. She's no...
Someone tags her. Don't tag her.
Don't tag her.
Don't do it.
So I'm starting to build some of the highlight areas with white color pencil. The Faber-Castell pencils they're really, really opaque. And Airbrush actually adds a little bit of grain on top of the paper, so it actually creates a little bit of tooth to which the pencil can actually go into. And a lot of this stuff I'll end up covering up with paint anyways, but kind of like the marker with the airbrush, I want to plot a little bit of that stuff out so that when I'm painting, I'm doing a little bit less guesswork. Because at this stage, I can change my mind about a few things. I can do the same with paint, I just don't want to. Those are, slightly more permanent. And looking for an eraser here. I just keep setting them down in places. What's that?
I keep losing stuff.
I know. I just don't want to juggle through pencils. Because I imagine that sounds pretty awful. What's up?
I'm not going to say what she said.
Oh, why? Will it get us demonetized?
I don't know.
Great news. We don't have monetization, so fire away. We're not eligible. Carry on.
She's too busy learning how not to act to watch art videos.
Good point.
That seems mean.
It's not mean if it's true, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe nobody's giving her good constructive feedback. I mean, if she's ever been on the internet, she would get all the feedback she needs. But we saw one movie where I thought she was all right, but maybe it was Nicholas Hoult was doing all the heavy lifting.
Oh yeah.
That's a cool movie though. It's a sci-fi flick. I can't remember what it was called.
Shoot. I love Nicholas Hoult.
Yeah, we'll just give him credit for that. All right, Nicholas Hoult.
He's got pretty blue eyes.
He's
pretty.
He's a beautiful man.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, Lisa's laughing.
That's funny.
Like, nah, you won't get demonetized. We have no money.
Yeah, we're not eligible for monetization, so, or at least currently. We got a ways to go.
Tell your friends.
Yes. So I'm kind of going back over areas where I was like, whoops, too much marker, whoops, too much airbrush. Again, I could have masked these areas, but for the sake of time, I just like to keep things jamming. So I'm kind of getting these light reflective areas coming across. And actually, we're almost entirely at a spot where we can start doing some of the paint detail work, which is great.
Yay!
Careful, careful, careful. So you have to sneeze?
Yeah.
Point your COVID away from me.
It went away. But we love each other. We share everything.
Even the COVID?
Even the COVID.
You have been demonetized.
Darn it.
That's what's going to happen. They won't let me put this video
Probably
up.
shouldn't joke about that.
Yeah, probably not, huh? You know, it's really the only way to deal in times like this, I think. To some degree. We have to be a little bit silly about it. Doesn't make it less real.
Yeah.
We have to deal with it every day when we go outside, so... Whatever, man. Could be worse.
I think the gummy worms are helping.
Yeah.
Yeesh.
I was saying earlier, if we really wanted to entertain people, we have to start making videos about the shape of the Earth.
Please no.
Oh, come on.
No.
It'll be so fun.
No. It'll irritate me so much. So much. No.
My guilty pleasure is watching flat Earth videos. Not because I believe they are true or that the Earth is flat. Because I have a lot of respect for the imagination that you have to have for some of these explanations. I kind of go, man, these guys are creative as hell.
They're in denial, that's what it is.
Yo, you just don't understand.
Ugh.
The government got to you. That's what they want you to think.
Neil
Also,
deGrasse Tyson got to you.
yeah, also penguins aren't real. Birds aren't real. What else?
Is it the moon isn't real?
The moon is the center of a lot of things that aren't real. But it's so interesting.
It is not. It hurts my brain.
Well, I mean, yeah, that, but...
Oh, but I mean, like, it's only fair because I play ghost videos, and I know ghosts aren't real, but it's fun to me. So I guess we both, like, we both have our guilty pleasures on,
For sure.
on YouTube videos.
It's fun. It's fun. And being entertained, especially in times like this where we're at home a whole lot more. You gotta find something to make you feel less crazy.
But I'm crazy all the time.
I know. No, that's okay.
Like, there's no turning it off. Not really.
But don't you feel less crazy when you watch flat Earth videos?
No.
Are you
That's
sure?
you.
Oh, yeah. That's true. That's true.
I will watch creepy stories about time travelers, ghosts, demons, all this stuff, and just not bat an eye. And then he puts flat Earth videos on, and my eye starts to twitch.
Yes. Well, Because it's causing you to think outside the box.
No,
Or
it's
the
not.
pizza plate, if I may be so bold.
There's no plate for a pizza.
There's a plate for the earth.
No.
Bro, it's on YouTube. It's real.
Oh,
These are
God.
facts. Facts. I'm going to get misquoted, and everyone's going to think I'm a flat earther. This is my one fear. As I become well known for something stupid. Like...
Pinstripe Chris believes the Earth's flat.
Yeah, great. Alright. That'd be the one thing that sticks, I'm sure.
Yep.
I just want to point out, I don't believe the Earth is flat. That's absurd. Well, I've never been to space, and I've never seen it. I have it on good authority.
So you use zoom on your camera really far out.
Dude,
You can see the curve.
there is an International Space Station, and they see the Earth every day.
And we saw a couple of years ago where it wasn't a rocket. It was a shoot.
What was
The
it?
shuttle, the space shuttle.
Oh yeah, when it came back for the last
when it came
time.
back, they flew over our house. It
Yeah.
was awesome. Alan, are you both artists? Me, not so much. I got too much on my brain right now. I can do little doodles. That's as far as I go.
Although Katie did go to school for art, actually, though.
Yeah.
So she has that advantage over me, for sure.
I like holding the camera. That's as far as I will go.
You know what? That is just as important a job as anything else.
Well, it's the one thing I liked when I went to school for animation and found that I am not a fast drawer at all. And they wanted you to do everything by hand, scan it in the computer, do all the colorations. I am not that fast at all, and I got frustrated really, really quickly. But I did like my film class where I got to take my little camera and film a bunch of different stuff with my friends. So at least I found something out of it.
Yeah.
Lisa says the videos that you like are amazing.
Which videos? The
Flat Earth. She said,
there it
haha,
is.
those are amazing.
They are amazing.
No, they're not.
I'm not saying they're true.
Mm.
They're amazing because of how creative they are. Come on.
Oh, just people making conspiracies out of nothing.
Yo, it's only a conspiracy if you say it's a conspiracy.
It's not a conspiracy. What is the
That's what I've been
point
telling
of
you.
lying about the shape of the Earth? There is no point in lying that the Earth isn't round. It's stupid.
You're just a shill.
Oh.
You're a round earth shill.
Just,
You believe everything they want you to believe.
I believe in scientists because they worked hard to get their fancy degrees and find out how stuff works. So.
Whatever. Scientists are all green screen.
Oh, they are.
100%.
100%.
So are penguins.
I'm gonna get Bill Nye in here.
Penguins are also green screen.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Alright. So while we're ranting and raving about that, it was more or less just tightening up lines and details. And stuff like this, I don't want to keep working with markers or airbrush to get fine lines and details. I want to use a smaller, more precise tool. And that's essentially what I'm doing. I'm essentially kind of cleaning up some of the edges and lines so that I can pave the way to the next step, which is final details with paint. And let's see, there's a couple of things I still want to do. Pencil here, and still more or less freehanding. There's a few things that are a little bit more important to get accurate. And you're getting some of these door edges, just kind of help show the shape a little bit better. Door edges on like a side view or something like this are one of the only indications of the shape of a vehicle, so you can't leave them out. They got to be there. I wish this pencil was just a little bit bigger. I can handle these details a little bit better, but we're jamming through. We're doing good here.
Yeah, that's just about done to me.
In some ways. I mean, I'm still missing all the wheel spokes.
Really?
There are 0 wheel spokes here.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm going to grab
I'm using my phone, so like it's a very little picture
Well,
from.
as long as it looks like something.
Well, it does look like something, but I just have it smaller on my phone.
Yeah.
Because I want to see the comments you guys are saying.
So I'm going to grab a Bic pen real quick, and I'm going to outline this piece of trim here so that it can have a little bit more attention to it. So some of this final stuff I will start to outline, let's say like the bottom of this door handle, where I know there's a little bit more contrast. I'll do with this Bic pen, and the initial sketch is blue, and the little details that I'm getting ready to do are black. And I mentioned early in the video, the reason I don't like to, so here's the initial drawing, of course. The reason I don't like to render straight over something like this is because the line weights, while they look really cool as a drawing, as a final render or as a piece, it'll look very cartoony because it'll have an animation feel. And while I love animation in cartoons, the builder I work with might not share my enthusiasm.
Damn, this is true.
So, not that this is like realistic or based in reality, but those are the differences that take something from looking a little bit cartoony into something that looks, my goal is believability, you know, something that feels real-ish. It's still a technical illustration at the end. And most of the really cool stuff happens in the final highlights anyways. And we're getting there. A lot of the final stuff I'm going to do is just going to be freehand. And yeah. Alright, so actually we're in a great spot where I can switch over to the thing. Yeah. Alright, I'm going to move these pencils off to the side. Actually, forgot one of the things that I wanted to do. I just want to make sure I grab the right color to do this. Actually, this one's going to be a little bit better. I'll switch over to a prism. Excuse me. So one of the other things that I like to do is add not like a random color, but another color as part of the lower area or the detail area, just to kind of offset the drawing a little bit. Even though I just said being realistic is somewhat important, this is where I depart from that a little bit. This is where I go, yeah, but it also has to be interesting to look at too. So this little bit of purple is just kind of a random color bounce. I mean, in my mind, it's not random. It's part of the color story that I'm trying to tell here. It's all in the same family, but it makes this just a little bit more interesting to look at. I think I said in my sketchbook review video the other day that if everything's monochromatic, then it's a little boring. So careful use of colors is really important. But you also can't just throw colors at something, because then you'll... People can tell when you just throw colors at something. It doesn't read very well. So, you have to be careful. I have to be deliberate. So just a teeny tiny bit of purple, because I don't necessarily like to have the final shadow line to be solid black, because it depends on the vehicle color, how we're going to share values or how we're going to put values and create a map that looks good without having too much detail in some areas and not enough in others. But I like these little color jogs. They actually add a lot of interest to it. And that's something I learned by watching the Chip Foose. Alright, so I'm going to put the colored pencils away now, and I'm going to grab some white paint. And we're going to start on the end of the starting of the end.
Ending?
The endinating. The re-ending.
The ending?
Ender's Game? Never mind. I was thinking something, but the words didn't come out. I just said them in my eyes.
That no one can see.
Yeah, that's
but
true,
me.
right? Yeah. Good at you, whatever. Noises.
Nice.
Alright, so the next part. My fancy piece of paper. Some of the details I'll do with, say, FW acrylics. This is a really, really smooth fine acrylic. I'll airbrush with this a lot of times. There's really no need for me to airbrush white necessarily, but in any case, it's good to have. And some of the details I'll do with gouache or acrylic gouache.
Acrylic wash.
Acrylic gouache. I'm trying to find a tube of it here.
There you go.
I gotta make sure I have enough before. That's the other thing that's really good about picking out materials before you get started, is making sure you have enough for everything that you're going to do. That way you don't get halfway into something and go, oh yeah, we're out of that. We're out of rolls. And it looks like I am slightly out of the acrylic wash that I've normally used, so we're going to use acrylic today, which is just fine. Just fine. Yeah, let's see. Grab one of these little plastic cups here, and just keep a whole set of paintbrushes on hand. This is a marker holder. I have a bunch of these, usually full of markers, but they're convenient to have for the 10,000 paintbrushes that I need. And I bought a paintbrush earlier, and I'm hoping that I put it in here. Because I have a lot of paintbrushes, but that means I burn through them because I'm a little bit hard on them. There we go. Found it. Okay, so let's see. I need to grab the other acrylic paint that I'm going to use since I think I'm out of acrylic wash. Or maybe not. Let's see here. I've got a little bit.
Add it to the list.
Yeah, probably enough to use. So this particular is by Holbein, or however you say their name. But really, really good stuff. Super opaque. I use it for airbrushing a lot of times as well. Looking for the water. I'm going to reduce this down a little bit and mix it up. And I'm also going to put a little bit of paint off to the side so that I can mix this up a little bit as I go. And all these details I'm going to do just freehand. I mean, I have a general sense of where they go. So it is a lot like guessing because it is guessing. But that's okay. This is a vehicle I'm pretty familiar with, so we'll be alright. Like I said, I do want to add a little bit more to the inside edge here. And it'll sort of make sense as I'm working. And make sure there's no paint on my hands so that I'm not contaminating, because at this stage I probably won't use this as much as a guide, even though it's actually more critical now. But I don't want to be distracted from what I'm doing. Why, paintbrush, why? So my new paintbrush is fighting me a little bit here. You were the chosen one!
But he has the high ground.
Does he, though?
According to him, yes.
According to him. Alright. So, what I'm doing with the paint is everything that I couldn't do before. Now, essentially, I've buried a lot of things with the technique that I'm using, at least in this particular demo. So there's a lot of stuff that needs corrected or rebalanced. You know, I've got a little bit of overspray on things. And overspray, generally, as long as it's managed well, isn't bad. But let's say I've got a little bit of pink in this headlight here. Probably not great. So I don't need to fill it in, but I do want to reference that there's white in it. And that's essentially what I'm doing here, is all the fine lines, the edge detailing work. On a vehicle, something like this that is partially organic shaped and then partially has a very like manufactured product shape, these fine line edges at the end help tell a lot of the story. Let me make sure that this is in frame here. And let's see, for example, this headlight has a trim ring that goes around it. And I'm just gonna walk around it and bring it in by hand. And then after that's dry, I can come back in on one side of it with a Bic pen and create a little bit of an edge where the seam is. I can sort of do the same over here. And let's see. And of course, you can see while I'm paletting on the side here, I'm also using the edge to knife it off. This is a habit from the pinstriping days. Just so if you overload the paintbrush, it will give you unflattering lines. You can even see areas where I've got the marker went just a little bit outside of my drawing. Let's come back in with some white paint. One pass of white paint isn't super opaque, so that little bit of line correction there isn't going to look like a white stripe on the outside of the vehicle. I would have to do that pass probably 5 times before it looks solid white. And so we'll start to make the horizon detail on the bumperettes here. I assume you probably could tape this out and do it in a little bit more of a deliberate way. I've always been more of a free-handy person. I think it has a little bit more of a natural look. And when you look at, say, pictures of cars at car shows or events, you know, reflections aren't super clean and super accurate because there's a lot of environment. Now, I like to clean a lot of that up in drawings like this because it's because I'm not drawing the park. I'm not drawing any background, a parking lot. So I want the reflections to be as simplified as possible. If I was doing an entire scene, then I can reflect those things in the body. When I see renderings and drawings where I've got a car on a white page and there's tree reflections and there's car reflections, to me all that stuff is just noise. You know, leave that out. Find a way to simplify your reflections because I realize in some ways it looks more realistic to be like, wow, the reflections are so good. But if it doesn't exist in the image itself, to me it looks weird. Like, why is that tree reflecting if there's no...
There's no tree.
If there's no tree. You're telling the story in a very incongruent way. And I think most people are still pretty impressed with artwork like that, but I'm not a trained artist, but as somebody that does this full time, seeing that stuff just confuses me. Like, I would skip that. Leave the tree out. Leave the kid running around with the park and the ball out. Like, why is that there?
I would say, though, if it was a dealership, or not a dealership, just like a shop that wanted that, like it depends on the customer. If it's a customer that really wants that stuff in, that's fine. That's their opinion. But for like car renderings, like they're building this car, it's like, why is it relevant to put that stuff
I think this kind of gets back to a little bit of what I was saying earlier. To me, there's a huge difference between technical illustration renderings and art. Even though some people can look at this and go, well, that's art. This has a different purpose to me. Yeah. When you're doing paintings, you're telling a totally different story. So that's where I go, oh yeah, shut up. I'm saying something totally different in relation to how I feel like paintings and artwork goes. This to me, I don't want to say it doesn't feel like art. It's different. This is technical illustration.
Yeah. Alan said, yeah, the eye and brain do a lot of fill-in.
They do. And so you can leave a lot of space for interpretation. You don't want to get so vague that nobody knows what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But I think a good artist should know when to leave details out and when to put details in. Because you don't need to put everything in.
Yeah, it's not necessary.
Yeah. And let's say, especially in the case of a rendering like this is 1417 marker paper. To me, this is tiny, not the smallest I ever worked, but this is pretty small. Eventually, you're going to run out of brushes and tools that will make you good details. That's not to say that you can't do it or that you won't get a really cool end result out of it. But to me, when you have artwork that's small and condensed like this and you start to busy it up, it just turns into noise so fast. And your eye just doesn't know where to land. And again, we're talking technical illustration design work. I'm going to show this to somebody, and I want them to not be confused. I want them to see it and understand the idea that I have in my mind, not judge based on how I did some weird detail. That might be a cool aspect of your style, but if it's a distraction, then you're just creating noise. And cars are, of course, big metal objects, so we can outline a lot of this stuff with heavy white and get away with an awful lot to create edges this way or detail. Organic things like animals, especially, you wouldn't want to do something like this. You're gonna turn it into a very very illustrative, comic booky look when you start to hard outline stuff like this on things that should be a lot more organic. But cars are machines, and they're glossy and metallic, so we can get away with a little bit more here.
Mm-hmm.
going on over there?
Me?
Nothing?
Nothing?
Just curious.
Why, you see what I'm looking at?
Yeah. Of course I do. I'm confused, but of course I do.
Did throw you off.
Yeah. So I'm kind of, not only am I cleaning up some of the shapes here, I'm creating some edges and some highlights, but all in one step. If you go back and try to do this every single time you need to fix a line or something looks out of place, some stuff does need to be fixed faster than other stuff, but if you stop and start a million times, it's a really inefficient way to do artwork. And again, stuff like this is always under the gun as far as time goes. So I say, make better mistakes. Why you laugh?
Make better mistakes.
Make cool mistakes.
There you go.
So some of this outside edge I'm actually going to outline in white too. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, but I'm going to use some of the pre-mix water and acrylic gouache and then some of the actual gouache so that I can make something that's slightly diluted so that when it dries, it's an edge, but it isn't like stark white. And in this way I can kind of recover a little bit of that overspray detail and kind of centralize the visuals a little bit. I mean, we got a little bit of lag. Yeah, there's a disconnect. Hopefully it reconnected. We'll see here in a second.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, good. Sorry about that. Hopefully we didn't lose you guys for too long. Also kind of going back and forth between pen and paint here as I'm starting to define edges a bit more in the finality of what's happening. I'm sure you've noticed I have not done the wheels yet. Stuff like that I usually save for last, but we are getting there.
I don't know why that jumped in my head.
Is everything all right over there?
No.
No.
Brain. Why? What part of the drawing is the most fun for you?
Actually, the initial sketch, drawing from scratch is something I like. And I don't always get to do it. Sometimes it's a better decision to overlay something or trace a good reference depending on the time or the accuracy level is necessary. So actually being able to, getting to draw something from scratch is one of my favorite parts. It also can be one of the more stressful parts. Because I like building something that doesn't exist as far as the drawing goes. But that's really where all the legwork is. That's where all the problems happen. And sometimes that can be the most difficult part because you're trying to create something, especially in the case of what I do, you're trying to draw something in a perspective that doesn't exist, that you don't have a perfect reference for, and you try to get the details right. Of course, I like the rendering phase as well, but you know, it tells a different part of the story. But I like it all. I think it's all fun. And a lot of the stuff I'm just implying details. I don't need to get overly carried away. You know, black vehicle, a lot of what you see as detail is just actually the edges of stuff. So we gotta be careful not to overdo it, because if you just start outlining everything, it just takes on a pretty rough look. And real quick, I'm going to just go ahead and plot the grill in here. Oops, moving the drawing around too much.
Can you say what the white paint is again? that you're using for highlights?
Yeah, this is acrylic wash. You can do this very same thing with actual acrylic or actual gouache. There's no wrong answer. I just happen to use acrylic wash because if you're familiar with how gouache works, some of the aspects of its functionality is super, super cool, somewhat reversible. In this particular brand, they just make a really, really great acrylic wash that's opaque, but you can dilute it and make it very transparent. Yeah, so acrylic wash is the answer. But you could use just acrylic or fluid acrylic. But what you might run into is opacity. Eventually you might run into light fastness issues. Just depends on the product for sure. We're just about there. We're getting down the final highlights and whatnot. Just trying to be a little bit more deliberate in some of this last stuff. I can see my assistant starting to fade over there.
What? No.
No. Dying of boredom.
No, that's not it.
It's not it. What's the matter? She's going to take a little break, so I'll just hum along for the next few minutes. No, I'm just kidding. I'll just talk a little bit more about what I'm doing here while I'm creating highlights. As I stop talking. Alright, so obviously I don't want like big huge highlights on every single little detail, so again, got to be really deliberate where everything's going. Let's see, I got a little heavy here. One of the things I like about gouache is that it's reversible. It is a material that you can move around even once you put it down. Acrylic gouache is a little bit different because it is actually permanent once it dries, but you can still move it around a little bit. Alright, so let's see, where are we at? The next thing I really have to focus on is actually the wheels. There's a couple of big highlights. I'm just going to save those towards the end. But for now, I'm just going to start plotting in the spokes for the wheels. So this part is actually going to be sort of interesting. You can see that I didn't sketch them in or anything like that, because this is something that's a little bit more experience-based, but I've done it enough times to kind of have the arithmetic in my mind already of how spokes generally work in a layout. That doesn't mean I'm going to get this 100% right on the first try, but I sure am going to try. So let's say, for example, I am imagining that spokes have a cross generally in the middle of their layout. Alright? So I've got two there, and then just to kind of break this down and make it simple, wheels to me are really, really basic math. They can get very busy if you want them to, but they don't have to. And generally, the weirder they look, the less natural they look. So I've got that split into 4 already. All I gotta do is split it into 4 again. And I am guessing, so I'm just kind of hoping that I land everything in the ballpark. But to some degree, doing design and drafting artwork is being good at guessing. Or hoping to be good at guessing, I should say. But there's a lot of room for error in spokes, so I don't have to pressure myself too bad on something like this. Alright, so I've got that split up. So now I know that the general arithmetic of the outside set of spokes looks pretty decent, and I'll get into the spoke landings here in a moment. There's, I think, 2 or 3 layers of spokes in this particular wheel. So I have to be sort of methodical, but also sort of random about how I do the rear spokes, because I want to busy up the wheel a little bit, but I don't want to overdo it in a way that looks super unnatural. So I want to land somewhere in the middle here. And even though this part looks random, I'm using a little bit less pressure so that the spokes are a little bit finer. And I guess you could see how random this is and go, why would you even bother with the first set? Because you need to start with some basis of reality before you break reality. And actually, that looks pretty well balanced to me. I don't want to overdo it. That's the thing. And then, let's see, I'll go a little bit extra solid on the couple of spokes that I know are going to be highlighted towards the end here. And that's just thinking a few steps ahead.
What is your dream car?
Dream car, that's a good question. Man, it's changing all the time. I like so many different cars. I'm actually a huge fan of classic Ferraris, but I'm more of a 250 GT person. So maybe a 250 GT Lusso or a Berlinetta. But this is a 275. This comes after the 250, obviously. So I'm really more of a 250 person. But at the moment, that's what I would say. I would love to have a Ferrari 250. 250 GT. But I've had a lot of cool cars over the years, and I do enjoy them. Because just as much as drawing them, I also drive them. So I'm an entire enthusiast. So next, I'm going to put all the little landings in for these spoke guys. And in some cases, this is an unnecessary detail, but I need a little bit more in here to root this in reality.
Do you have any Panteras in the stable of your drawings? I don't remember you drawing any of those.
I did some design work for a guy building a Pantera a couple of years ago, and I don't even know if I ever shared it or not. I don't get to share all the artwork that I do. Half the time it's because of like NDAs for design work, and the other half of the times it's like, that wasn't even that fun, or it's not that cool. So I don't know. I've done Panteras. It's not a favorite design of mine. It might just have a lot to do with the era that I grew up. I don't find them to be especially attractive cars myself. That is probably a very unpopular opinion, but there's a car out there for everybody. That's just not really the kind of car that I like. To me, I could probably make a video on how I would redesign one, but I would scrap so much of the car, it's not even worth a redesign. I don't find them to be good-looking cars.
Well, like everyone has that car or that design that year where it's like, oh, why did they do that?
Oh, 100%. There's so much stuff that I've owned that people hate for sure, and I don't take it personally.
No.
And cars have been around for 100 years, so imagine every single make and model that has existed is somebody's favorite. So that means there's definitely something for everybody. But that means we're not always going to agree on that kind of stuff. And that's fine. It's like a lot of things, especially, cars and art, it's personal taste. We don't need to all like the same things. What kind of brings enthusiasts together is that they don't like the same things. And we can all kind of talk about the things that we like together. But yeah, there's plenty of stuff that I've owned that, my goodness.
Sure. It's said by everybody.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I love C10s, but I also get exhausted from drawing them all the time.
Everyone has a C10 or like they tweaked it a little bit, so it's just like you're drawing the same thing.
Yeah.
But like a different color, or like this window looks different, or this truck bed looks different.
It gets repetitive and boring.
Yeah.
But that's art for you. Eventually, too much of anything is no longer special. And I love C10s, but I also don't find them to be that rare, that unique.
Not anymore, at least.
Yeah. That was my first.
Everywhere.
The first 3 vehicles I had were classic C10s. 69, 72, and actually the third one was an OBS. It was a 1500 from 2003. But in any case, once everybody's got one, they're no longer that cool to me. They can't be. It's not like indie or underground anymore.
Yeah, you've kind of been like that since we were teenagers.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll never enjoy the same thing as everybody else.
At least not right away.
Not in the same way, that's for sure. And I was even thinking, one of the cars I have is a classic Volkswagen Bug, but it is not a standard Volkswagen Bug. It doesn't even look like a Volkswagen Bug. So, caveats. Plus, if I thought like people enjoyed like the Porsche that I have, if they become way more popular, then I'm done. Time to get rid of the car. Time to move on to something.
Well, Nicholas wants to know what you think of old BMWs.
Ooh, I love BMWs. I like the 2002 is one of my favorite cars. I love those. It's a bummer that they became such cult classics because now they're
now they're expensive.
yeah,
dude.
but I love those cars. I like how cool and how small and how elegant they are. Which is funny because I'm actually not a BMW person. I like German cars, but I had a really really peculiar experiences with BMWs when I was younger. So it's not like I don't want for owning a BMW. I have a 911. I'm very happy with that right now. But I love classic BMWs. I like classic European cars, as you may or may not be able to tell. All right. So while I was talking that whole time, I got all the spokes done, which is cool. Wheels are like that detail in the car that really bring the story together. Generally, the flow and shape of reflection should be simple. It shouldn't busy up the image so much that you're like, wow, there's a whole lot going on. But the wheels are a really, really great detail to help pull your eye in. And there's a couple of caveats that come with that. One, they have to be round, 100%. So when people are asking me about freehanding them, I will say it's give and take. If I need something to be perfect, I'm not going to waste my time. I'm just going to use ellipse tools. And everybody's ability to freehand is also totally, totally different. So for me to tell somebody how to freehand doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to come naturally to them, but that shouldn't hold you up. If the wheels are not round, you have done yourself a disservice. Forget about anything else. But take a concept car, for example. Everything that's in between the wheels is just weird shapes and all kinds of crazy stuff happening, but the wheels kind of keep you grounded visually. No matter what, the wheels will be round. Think about a really abstract painting of somebody's face where they're using lots of bizarre colors and really heavy brush strokes. Generally, artists still take the time to make sure the eyes are right, the nose is in the right place, and the lips are shaped right. You can exaggerate these things, absolutely. Same with the wheels. However, that's that detail that kind of grounds you in reality. When somebody's eyes are painted badly or incorrectly, it might be a small detail, but it's such a huge distraction, you may as well have not done the rest of the artwork. So I'm just cleaning out this paintbrush real quick because one of the other things that I wanted to do before I get into the big highlights is I set pencils down is a little bit of the highlight on the tires real quick because I can carry the highlight into the wheels, and I'll explain kind of the formulaic process of that.
Nicholas says he owns a BMW E28, and
Nice.
before that he had an E36.
Nice. It's a little bit more contemporary.
I'm not familiar with those models.
Max has a BMW.
Oh, I know, but I don't know. Is that one of the models?
No, Max has got something. Nicholas might know better than either of us because he clearly is in the world. He has what would be before the E36, so it would have been like a 99, 2000-ish. I don't know if that's just E30, I think, but I bet Mr. Nicholas will correct us if we are wrong.
Yeah, because I'm only familiar with the models now. Like I actually like the M3s, but it's a little more money than I want to spend on a car at the moment. So I got a GTI.
GTI are super cool though. You would think for somebody that specializes, or a family that specializes in classic American hot rod design, we would have more American cars. We used to.
You used to.
Yeah, and got tired of being on the side of the road so often.
Yeah.
I don't mind a little bit of pit stop on the side of the road here and there. It's not, then the Volkswagen Bug is a great example of that. It's not like we're never on the side of the road. It's just those are very manageable problems. Versus I've almost, up until recently, I always drove 60s cars as daily drivers. So I have had Corvairs. I'm a huge Buick person, so I've had tons of classic Buicks. And they are quirky cars. I like them because of the quirks. But as I got further along in my professional career, it became more important to arrive places on time. Again, kind of like being out of the material that you need to do something. Going somewhere that you have a professional opportunity for, nobody wants to hear that that you drove a car that overheated or the transmission blew up. It's sad. It's a bummer for sure. I don't think that people won't sympathize with you, but eventually you just have to be a little bit smarter about, or at least I had to be a little bit smarter, rather. You do whatever you would like about what I owned and what I drove, how it reflected me as a person in some ways, and as time goes on, my values change. So I ended up getting different types of cars and finding out that I loved all this other cool stuff that I'd never even thought twice about. I was never a 911 person until recently. I've actually always been a classic Ferrari person.
Yep.
And I've enjoyed working on them too. But, people's tastes change, and that's okay. It's not a bad thing.
I liked the Fiero.
Yeah, the Fiero was a great example of a cult car that we had that everybody hates. Yes. But, man, what a cool car. They're so fun. There's a lot of issues with them as well, of course. But it was such a cool little car, especially for the time that we had it. It did us well.
Nicholas says his dream car is a 68 Roadrunner.
Ah, very nice, very nice. I'm not a big Mopar person myself, but I can see why people really, really appreciate them. So I'm just working in some of these tire highlights. I'm doing it really carefully with pencil. I could do it with airbrush and then recut it with marker. Maybe in another demo I'll do that, but I'm just kind of trying to keep the pace right here. And I'm just going to show a little bit of tire edge. I'm just kind of freehanding this in so that the tire doesn't just fall into the shadow. A little bit of that is okay. I just don't want it to be like, I don't want tires to feel like infinity is happening. Sometimes, yes, but we're wrapping up here, so. And then I'm going over a black marker surface, so even though I put a little bit of white pencil down, I could either hit it with an eraser, or I can reshape it a little bit with colored pencil. Yeah, we're just about down to major highlights, and we'll be wrapped up here. I mean, I can make this take longer if we need to, but I don't think you want to. We're doing good, though. I've got nowhere to be. But yeah, we're doing good. Okay, so the next thing, the 50th time that I've said that, major highlights, and yeah, maybe I'll do a background block or something like that, but major highlights. So I'm going to grab the white paint again. I'm going to prime it up with a little bit more titanium white. You can see that the paint here is reduced with water. And you like to keep a little bit of paint on the edge personally, so that if I need something that's a little bit bolder, a little bit fatter, I can just grab some more paint and mix it into my premix. And that's what we're getting ready to do. Brace yourself. All right. So the major highlights to me are an additive detail, which means we're putting them on top as opposed to subtractive detail. You could use like a liquid mask or frisket or something like that if you knew exactly where the highlights were going to be, so that you can get the paper white highlights to come all the way through. That is one way. But the way that I do lighting is I'm making up the lighting as I go. So I'm creating it from scratch, which means I don't necessarily know where all of those things are going to go yet. So it's better to be doing it additive later. And you can kind of see I'm just kind of pressing the paintbrush down, and I don't want to give too aggressive of a whip because it'll get carried away pretty quick here. All right, in any part of the process, you could avoid the areas, like I was saying, that you know are going to be highlights. I just like to have this really crisp, extra bold white at the end. And stuff. So this is kind of where things really start to kind of come together and feel a little bit more lively, which is cool. And sometimes I think I mentioned, I see artists do these types of details first or really, really early on. And I'm like, man, how do you even know that all that stuff is even going to go there? But it works for some people. And if I'm really careful, I can just kind of stand the paintbrush up on edge or lay it down on its side, depending on the size line that I need. Sometimes I'll go back and forth between a few different size brushes, but it's not really that necessary. Again, kind of depending on the pace that everything needs to go. And generally, highlights need to follow a little bit of a pattern. You don't want to just put them all over the place. There needs to be some linearity to them so they feel like they're planted in all in the same universe. Because if you start adding white dots everywhere, it's going to look like you just started adding white dots everywhere. I'll show you guys. While the gouache is still wet, take a paintbrush that's a little bit damp, and you pull this edge down a little bit here, pull that edge down a little bit there, maybe clean that up a little bit there. So you can work the paint while it's still wet and kind of create those soft edges on either edge. I don't do that all the time, but it's a great feature of gouache. Generally, I think acrylic gouache is less likely to yellow as well. Actual gouache can kind of yellow and crack because of the nature of the material that it is. Let me tell you, yellow highlights, not great. And more or less what I mean about highlights being rooted in the same reality is there's a linearness to where they are, but you need to stagger them based on the shape. So this next highlight, for example, is going to be outside of that one, because if you look at the door edge, the surface is rounded. So as you go around, the highlights will follow the curve of the body. And likewise, if you do it wrong, you can create weird divots in the body, which is, again, not super attractive.
Everyone's just watching.
Nice.
Let me know if you guys have questions.
Yeah. I always literally thought this would be as boring as watching paint dry because, well, that's what we're doing.
Yep. It's totally dry.
It's totally drying. It's crazy how much it's drying right now. Wouldn't it be hilarious if the highlight of this live video was us talking about Kristen Stewart?
I thought the highlight was going to be talking about flat Earth.
Oh man, I totally forgot about flat Earth already.
Damn it!
Damn it. It's alright.
My own fault.
You said it. You said the magic word. Word of the day is Earth equals flatness.
Nope.
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 Brah. Brah.
I'm not your bra.
I know. We cool. We cool. Alright. Just kind of getting these last little painty doos in here. And this is the time where I'm working on the harshest, brightest highlights. Again, I don't want to get too carried away, but I want to show some of these hot spots and how the shape change is happening without just like plucking down a ton of white. It has to feel deliberate. Or I should say it should feel deliberate. And some of these major whites I'll have to make a couple of passes on because this is maybe a little bit too reduced or whatever, but you would rather build up to it than accidentally put way too much down.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there is some room for error in these types of details, but you know, less of that work you have to do at the very end, the better. And sort of weird, I have a similar approach to the way I paint, which is probably what makes painting for me so frustrating. I love to paint on canvas, but because I have this really... this to me seems a little bit unorthodox as far as the overall approach. To paint like this, which I do, does not always guarantee outcomes. So sometimes I'll work on a painting and it will not go well because I'm doing so much guesswork, and it's obviously on a much larger scale. So it's give and take for sure. But yeah, you can imagine that this type of technique on a canvas works.
It's a little harder.
Yeah, it does work, and I prefer to have the same approach to everything, but there does have to be some change in approach so that you can actually complete something.
Jay Tuner says that looks beautiful.
Thank you.
Nicholas, what pencil do you use for the sketch on this drawing?
A big pen. I'll show you. I'm sure once it's over, you can back up and all and see the very beginning. The original drawing that I did, the initial sketch, was actually black Bic pen, and this one, a final sketch, was blue Bic pen. And there's actually a rationale for that, and I sort of mentioned it lightly in one part. But the heavy black outlines on something like this will make it look very cartoony if you leave it. You could do thin black outlines and it won't be so bad as long as you're doing everything in one pass or you're using ship's curves or French curves in order to get the details right. But I actually like blue because it looks a little bit more natural. So because this is a vehicle and it's going to reflect sky tones up top, having blue outlines isn't really distracting. In some ways, it can help how natural it looks. And doing all these final lines freehand. Most of this I've done freehand. I've had a lot of practice of doing it freehand. I think sometimes grabbing tools really slows things down. So I try to do as much freehand as I can. I'm gonna do a little trick here to get a little bit of reflection on the headlight into the fender. So the headlights the covers are like a plexiglass, so you can see through them, but you need a little bit of reflection through them as well. So what I'll do is I'll take some heavily reduced white, so add a little bit of extra water to it, and let's say I pull this reflection all the way through, and try to feather that off a little bit while it's still wet. This is something that can be done with an airbrush, but I try to keep all the airbrushing stages together and all the paint stages together. I try to come up with a formula and a system where I don't have to do a whole lot of back and forth. And then while I'm there, I'll just come back in and add that seam again. And now we've got a little bit of glass reflection over top of the thing. And once it's dry, I can just keep going a little bit more aggressively, a little bit more. I could have done this with color pencil as well. As a matter of fact, I'll probably get a little bit more in here. Do something like this.
Jack said, I was the kid at art college who could draw but always needed a hand with the computer work.
They're both really effective ways to do artwork. I like them both so much. I like to think that one helps you be good at the other, but there's challenges that are different for each. For me, when I was learning how to work digitally, it was not easy, and it fought me for a long time until I just kind of let go and let myself learn what made it work, as opposed to trying to just apply what I thought I knew over and over again. It's a different medium. It requires a different touch. But it is incredibly amazing what you can do digitally. All right.
Yay.
Yes. All right. So just kind of want to tidy this up, and I got a couple major highlights left, and we'll be just about wrapped up with this guy.
Cool.
And we can all move on with our lives. I know, right? Got some of the major highlights I want to hit just one more time now that the paint is dry. So we can get a little bit more opacity out of it. And I'm going to go around part of the rim as well once that's dry. But yeah, it's nice. Sometimes I like that I have to do highlights twice anyways, because the first pass can be a little bit more like a glow, and the second pass is a little bit more of a stronger highlight.
Hernando says, thanks for sharing your process.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope somewhere in the universe this helps people.
Alan said, guys, thank you very much for sharing your talent and all the answers. Mostly, thank you for your time. Much appreciated. Hopefully see you on the next one.
Nice.
Stay safe.
Thank you for coming by.
Bye, Alan. Thank you for your questions.
Real quick, I'm going to get a little windshield highlight in here. Again, I'm not working with any references, so in my mind, I'm just kind of balancing contrast as I go, kind of going, you know what, this needs a little, this needs a little. You know, the reflective surfaces need to feel bright and high contrast. That's part of what makes them look wet or glossy. Alright, so next thing I want to do, or close to the last thing that I want to do, hopefully I'm still in frame here, is carefully go along the outside edge of the wheel. And of course I used markers and airbrush, so all these different pieces and parts of the wheel are all different colors. And the highlight can help break that up, but I like to re-outline the very edge in a single pass, even if it's a transparent white, so that it feels more like it's the furthest out part of the wheel. And you notice I'm kind of doing it in quarter sections or half sections of the wheel, rather than trying to pull the entire line all at once. When I'm freehanding ellipses, I do the same thing, one arc at a time. And a couple reasons for that. One, your hand just won't naturally bend all the way around. And if you try to force it to, you're going to end up with an unnatural shape anyways. So just take a little bit at a time, so that, you know, even if I'm making a mistake in this section, I'm not applying that mistake to the entire wheel. I can come back and fix an area versus trying to fix an entire wheel, especially at this stage when I'm about done. You know, this is where I want to slow down and be the most careful. Alright, looking good. Ferrari in a color that nobody asked for. I was actually going to do this green with a yellow nose graphic.
A Ferrari?
Yeah. I did a F40 green on Friday.
Oh, okay.
And I love British Racing Green as a color, and that particular Ferrari was British Racing Green. But the more I started looking at references, I thought, well, this is still a very Ferrari-themed paint job. It's just a contemporary concept on a classic Ferrari. So I'm making a couple of passes over top of other passes, just kind of trying to build this white a little bit more to cut it off of the background. If I had masked the edge, then it would be perfect anyways. There'd be no reason to outline it. But also if I had masked the edge, then that highlight line also wouldn't stand out either. So again, it's kind of the balancing your mistakes and managing them in a really cool way. Or hopefully, rather.
Roberto said, thanks a lot, Chris, for sharing your skills and knowledge. A true piece of art. Have a great week. Take care.
Hey, thanks very much for coming by.
Bye, Roberto.
And let's see, we're really wrapping up here. Just kind of a couple of big highlights. Exhaust here.
This is just something that you wanted to do, right? It's
Yep.
not a customer piece?
Yeah, this is totally for fun. This is my idea of what would be cool for a demo. And the reason I chose this one, I had the sketch work already done, and there's an entire video here on YouTube of the entire sketch. The other reason is, for these demos, a lot of times I'm the one that keeps the artwork in the end, so it's important to me to have something that I want to keep.
Something that you like.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, we're just in, let's see, we're going to bring this highlight up just a little bit. There we go. That guy matches that guy. maybe. Alright, clean out the painty brush here. Everything's looking really, really good. There's only one more thing, or one more thing I'm trying to make a decision on, if I want to do a background block or no. But while I'm thinking about that decision, let's talk about today's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. No, I'm just kidding, we're not sponsored.
Anyone know someone that wants to sponsor us?
We're not sponsored. So I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow real quick, just a teensy tiny bit. Again, it's acrylic wash. And it's just so I can paint in the emblem shape here real quick. I'm being a little bit pedantic about details at this point. But I want this to be a full video of how I would do this and try not to leave anything out. Totally worth it. Alright, the other thing that I am going to do, the very second to last thing, is let me just clean off some of the paint materials that I've got going on here. How are we doing time-wise? We're at 2.5 hours? That's not bad.
Yep.
Yeah.
Dirty.
Not bad, not bad. Alright, the last thing I'm going to do, the last thing before I sign this guy that I'm going to do, I'm going to try to find a blue pen here of a certain variety. And you'll notice, I'll show you rather. Come on, pen, I believe in you. In my initial sketch, I did this background block. And sometimes I'll do a fill-in area, or sometimes I just want an outline. And the reason for that is I like a little bit of a picture-in-picture feel. The car has a little bit more depth when it's standing outside of an additional shape. So I kind of want to do something similar here. But actually, what I can do, man, this drawing, the rendering actually looks really, really cool. I'm so glad I decided to do this. They don't all come out good. So let's see. Kind of put that, align that up where it was, and you can kind of see, if you can see through the paper, you can see that I can just kind of sketch this guy back through. So this is exactly how I did the initial sketch, or I'm sorry, not the initial sketch. This final sketch that I rendered is I had the rough sketch. I have it underneath of this paper. That's how traditional drafting techniques work. You overlay it with another sheet of paper, and you look through to the other side. In this case, I made a bunch of changes to the actual drawing, so you can kind of see one from the other here. And I went over the changes in the initial part. Alright, so for this, my box, my picture-in-picture look here, I don't want to get too carried away. I don't want to add black to the background. The roof of the car is already black, so the white makes really high contrast, and it makes that more legible. Those are things that are part of practice and experience as you go. What I'm actually going to end up doing is a gray. I just need to find a trusty marker. They're all trusty markers.
Handy dandy marker.
What's that?
Handy dandy marker.
Yeah, so let me make sure I've got a gray that's in a family that I like. Yes, it is. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this guy, as I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to freehand this as well. Now, because I like the little kind of kickoffs at the end there. And you can use your paper as a guide visually. I mean, you can't run your hand across it, but as what would look good or close freehand. I'm going to round this edge here a little bit and create a little bit more contrast just in these corners. It kind of creates a little bit more motion. Exactly. So we end up with this kind of, like I say, kind of a picture-in-picture look. And then what I can do while it's there is, you remember I used a little bit of blue on the upper surfaces. And I'll take that same blue and probably not on everything, but like the outside square here. I'll go over the ink that I already went over so that the upper surfaces still, the rest of the illustration feels like it's rooted in the same part of the illustration. This cool, well actually this pale indigo, these cool grays are actually quite warm. So I don't need to add any extra warmth to this because I don't want to draw any attention to it, but I don't want the upper ones to be warm either. I want all the cool stuff to be up top. And by cool I mean color, not like, hey, that's cool. Maybe double up a little bit there. Cool. Really, one of my favorite things about how much this is jumping out is that little bit of purple on the edge here. I don't know if you guys can see it, but that's probably my favorite part, is the way all the colors here work together. This balanced out so well. I'll be honest, they don't all, especially on demos. Sometimes I get halfway through something and I'm like, let's just get through this thing so it can be done and over with. But this came out so cool. I can't wait to post and share this. I plan on hopefully reviewing the footage and seeing if I can make a condensed version of this. The live stuff, the quality isn't often like perfect or great. So we'll see. Yeah, and I can always tell when I'm getting close to the end of something. I'm like just kind of noodling.
Noodling? What does that mean?
Like busying myself, like seeing something that's tiny and insignificant and thinking it needs fixed. Yeah, noodling. Wasting time. No. But yeah, this came out so cool. So the very last step, once I find the correct pen that I want, is to sign this guy. And this is something I'm stoked to be able to keep. Some of the demo stuff is like, alright, throw that one in the pile. This looks cool. I'm stoked. So thank you guys so much for coming along for this one. I had a blast. Hopefully we all learned stuff. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.
Bye guys.
Provided I can figure out how to turn this live stream off. We'll see. Guys, have a good one.